Everyone turned away, no one listened, until she met the eyes of a human. Sometimes, the strongest alliances are born from those who dare to speak when the world stays silent. The chamber was full, and yet she had never felt its emptiness so clearly. Voices flowed in layered harmonics above her head, precise and shimmering, translated into cascading symbols across the air by the hovering rings that circled the ceiling. Light from the mineral walls pulsed in slow breaths, reacting to the emotional frequencies of those assembled. The brighter the pulse, the stronger the consensus. Tonight, the chamber glowed in confident, synchronized waves. Everyone agreed with everyone except her. She stood among them, tall, composed, fair-skinned beneath the violet illumination. Her red hair spilled down her back in a loose cascade, catching sparks of refracted light like threads of quiet fire. To an untrained eye, she could have passed for human. But her long ears, arched and tapering elegantly to fine points, marked her unmistakably as one of the Averial. They twitched now, not from fear, but from irritation she refused to display anywhere else. A delegate across the circle spoke, his voice rippling through the chamber's acoustic field. Expansion into the neighboring Heliox system will proceed as projected. Resource assimilation is statistically optimal. The hovering rings brightened in approval. She inhaled. "My projections differ," she said. The chamber dimmed, not dramatically, just enough to register discomfort. Several delegates adjusted the bioluminescent filaments woven into their sleeves. One activated a private data screen that blossomed before his eyes, as though a sudden need for reading had overtaken him. Another tilted her head toward the ceiling in a posture that signaled polite non-engagement. It was a refined choreography of avoidance, practiced over many sessions. She continued anyway. The Heliox system houses 3 emerging civilizations. Cooperative exchange would yield higher long-term energy efficiency than forced integration. Silence. The translation nodes in the air rendered her words into sharp geometric glyphs. They hung there, waiting for reaction. No one responded. A cough would have been less awkward. At the edge of the chamber, in a seat clearly designed for someone slightly less tall and considerably less luminous than the others, the human shifted. His name was Daniel Armitage, though the chamber's translator insisted on rendering it as Daniel Unit of Arms. He had stopped correcting it after the 3rd attempt. He sat with careful stillness, hands folded loosely in his lap, dark suit slightly ill-suited to the iridescent environment. A small neural translator shimmered faintly at his temple. He had been told to observe. He was observing. He was also observing that no one was observing her. The delegate resumed speaking as if she had never interrupted. "Assimilation fleets are prepared. Resistance probability is minimal." The rings brightened again. Her ears angled backward briefly, then steadied. "Resistance probability is never minimal." Another delegate finally looked at her, not at her eyes, but slightly above her head, as though addressing the space she occupied rather than her. "Your caution has been noted in previous cycles." Previous cycles? That meant dismissed. Daniel's translator whispered into his auditory nerve, polite phrase indicating, "Please stop talking." He winced. She let the silence stretch, testing it. It pressed against her ribs like vacuum. For cycles, she had attempted to phrase her objections differently, more diplomatically, more statistically, more acceptably. Tonight she felt no desire to soften anything. "You are preparing to repeat our own historical errors," she said. A faint ripple passed through the chamber. History was not a popular subject. One of the elders spoke, voice low and resonant. "Our history led to our supremacy. Our history led to 3 planetary collapses and a civil war that lasted 80 rotations," she replied evenly. The elder did not answer. The rings dimmed slightly, uncertain. Daniel blinked at the translation scrolling across his vision. Planetary collapse. He made a small mental note, ask about that later, possibly with snacks. Around her, the Averial shifted in coordinated discomfort. They were a species of elegant consensus. Dissent was tolerated only when it was theoretical. Hers was not. She felt the familiar weight of their collective turning away, the subtle recalibration of body language that erased her from the conversational geometry. She had once been invited to stand near the central platform. Now she occupied a position 2 degrees closer to the periphery with each session. At this rate, she calculated, she would eventually be attending meetings from outside the building. Daniel raised his hand slightly. Several luminous eyes turned toward him in mild surprise. Humans were not known for restraint. The fact that he had remained silent for this long was already considered impressive. "Yes, human," the elder said. Daniel cleared his throat. "With respect, I may be misunderstanding the translation, but is the current proposal essentially, we arrive, we conquer, we optimize?" The translator hesitated, then rendered his words into harmonic equivalents. A pause. "That is an imprecise summary," a delegate replied. "Ah," Daniel nodded seriously. "So more of a we arrive, we efficiently restructure situation." A few ears twitched despite themselves. The chamber's light flickered uncertainly. She glanced at him. He did not look at her with pity. He looked at her like someone who had just noticed the only other person at a party who also thought the music was too loud. "We restructure for stability," another delegate insisted. Daniel leaned back slightly. "On Earth, we attempted stability through restructuring several times. We eventually discovered that the people being restructured tend to object." A faint murmur traveled through the harmonic field. She felt something unexpected tug at the corner of her mouth. The elder regarded Daniel carefully. "Your species' history is turbulent." "That is one word for it," Daniel agreed. "Another is educational." A subtle pulse of dim amusement flickered across the walls. She stepped forward, seizing the moment before it vanished. "The human speaks from empirical failure. That is a valuable data set." Daniel blinked. "I'm not sure I've ever been described as a valuable data set before. I'll put that on my resume." Her lips curved before she could stop them. Several delegates noticed. The elder's gaze sharpened. "You align yourself with an outsider." "I align myself with evidence," she replied. "And you assume cooperation would succeed." "I assume annihilation guarantees resistance." Silence again, but thinner now, less absolute. Daniel glanced at the floating projection of the Heliox system rotating slowly above them. 3 planets glowed faintly. "For what it's worth," he said lightly, "humans are very good at making friends when properly motivated. Usually, by fear of mutual destruction." "That is not reassuring," a delegate murmured. "It's honest." She felt the chamber's attention shifting, not entirely away from her this time. Some were listening, reluctantly, defensively, but listening. And yet the weight of isolation remained. She knew the pattern. They would adjourn. They would deliberate privately. Her proposals would be archived under ideologically interesting but operationally inconvenient. The elder inclined his head. "This session will recess for recalibration," which meant dismissal. The harmonic field dissolved into layered private conversations. Delegates moved in graceful arcs toward side corridors, their luminous garments trailing faint currents of light. She stood still for a moment. Then she turned, not toward the exit, but toward the human. He was watching her openly now. Up close, she noticed the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the way his translator implant hummed softly as it recalibrated to the fading chamber acoustics. He looked smaller than the Averial, less radiant, more solid. "You did not have to speak," she said. He shrugged. "I was told to observe. I observed that no one was talking to you." Her ears angled slightly forward. "They were speaking." "Not to you." A pause. "That is accurate." He offered a half-smile. "I've been in rooms like that." She studied him carefully. Humans were catalogued as emotionally volatile, technologically inventive, occasionally self-destructive. The file did not mention this quiet steadiness. "You risk diplomatic friction," she said. "I'm a consultant," he replied. "Friction is in the job description." A faint sound escaped her, almost a laugh, sharp and unfamiliar in her own throat. He brightened. "There it is. I was hoping that was possible." "What?" "A sense of humor. My species possesses humor." "I'm sure you do. It's just very dignified." She considered that. Dignity and humor are not mutually exclusive. On Earth they often are. Her ears twitched again, less from irritation now, more from curiosity. "Why did you truly intervene?" He hesitated only briefly. Because everyone deserves at least one person who doesn't look away. The chamber was nearly empty now, the walls dimmed to a resting glow. She felt something shift within her, not dramatic, not revolutionary, just a small recalibration. "My name," she said slowly, "is Lyrene." His translator stumbled, then corrected. "Lyrene," he repeated carefully. "Daniel." "I am aware," she said. "Of course you are." A beat of silence settled between them, but it was different from the one that had surrounded her moments ago. This one was not exclusion, it was space. "The council will proceed without my input," she said. "Probably," Daniel agreed. "You find this amusing." "A little. Institutions everywhere share one trait. And that is, they hate being told they're wrong." Her gaze drifted to the fading projection of the Heliox system. "They are wrong. Then I suppose you'll have to keep telling them." She looked at him again, measuring. "Will you continue to speak?" she asked. "When they turn away?" Daniel met her eyes without hesitation. "Yes." A faint warmth spread through her chest, an unfamiliar sensation, as though a long-dormant circuit had quietly come online. "Very well," she said. He tilted his head. "That's it. For now." He smiled. "Good, I prefer alliances that begin quietly, less paperwork." As they walked toward the chamber's exit together, the mineral walls pulsed faintly behind them, recording everything. Somewhere within the council's vast data archives, this moment would be logged as a minor anomaly. Extended interaction between dissenting delegate and human observer. No one yet understood that anomalies were often the beginning of evolution. Lyrene's long ears angled forward as they stepped into the corridor, attuned not to the fading echoes of dismissal, but to the steady rhythm of footsteps beside her. For the first time in many cycles, she did not feel alone in the chamber's silence. Lyrene found herself in a narrow observation corridor, the walls of which were made from a semi-transparent alloy that shimmered with a faint greenish hue, revealing the planet's storm-racked surface below. She had walked this path countless times, yet never had it seemed less like a thoroughfare for official business and more like a waiting room for the universe itself. Daniel walked beside her, hands loosely clasped behind his back, his dark suit slightly wrinkled from the long session. His presence was a peculiar kind of reassurance, human, unpolished, unpredictably alive in a world of exacting symmetry and ritualized postures. "So," he said, glancing sideways at her, "you speak to all humans like this." Lyrene raised an eyebrow. "What my charm and wit?" She allowed a faint smirk, her long ears tilting just enough to suggest irony. "No, only the ones willing to endure my unsolicited commentary on interstellar policy." "Good, because I have a very high tolerance for unsolicited commentary," he replied. "I also happen to be very bad at politics, so it balances out." Her lips twitched. Humans were rarely humorous on the first try, yet his timing was almost natural. "You have been briefed," she said dryly. "You were informed that our species views human intervention as messy." "Messy is subjective," he said. "I prefer to call it colorful." She tilted her head, letting a single lock of red hair fall forward across her cheek. The corridor hummed softly with the residual energy of the chamber above, small pulses that resonated in her bones like the memory of a heartbeat. "Colorful is rarely efficient," she murmured. "Our council requires efficiency." "And yet," Daniel said, "you are standing here, talking to me instead of writing a meticulous report." "Reports have a way of disappearing into archives," she said. "Like a corpse swallowed by the data stream, I prefer witnesses." "You could have witnessed holograms," he suggested with a faint grin. "Less dramatic, but safer." "Safer is for those who do not wish to be noticed." She paused, ears twitching. "I am noticed whether I like it or not." Daniel glanced at her and frowned thoughtfully. "So you're saying you enjoy the attention?" "Not in the way you imagine," she said. "It is inconveniently illuminating, like standing on a sun-drenched ridge in a fog storm. Visibility is temporary and dangerous if unprepared." He laughed quietly, and it echoed oddly in the alloy corridor. "I think that's the best analogy I've heard all day, and I've spent most of it listening to people argue about planetary assimilation plans." Lyrene allowed herself a small, fleeting smile. Humor, she realized, was easier with someone who did not judge the inflection of your syllables or the subtle bends in your ear tips. Humans did not measure humor with long ears and precise lip quivers. They measured it in tone, in timing, in willingness to endure ridiculousness without retreating. She found this oddly liberating. They walked past a series of transparent panels, each displaying rotating 3D star systems, their planets orbiting in quiet, calculated dances. Lyrene paused, hand hovering over one of the panels. "Look at Heliox," she said. "3 worlds, unclaimed, yes, but not uninhabitable. We assume conquest is the only pathway." Daniel leaned over, tilting his head to inspect the system. "Unclaimed or uninvited?" he asked. Lyrene blinked. "Excuse me." "Sometimes," he said, "not all systems want what we think they want. On Earth, we call that stubbornness. I'm guessing your people call it resistance." Her ears twitched forward at this, a subtle sign of interest. "Resistance is costly," she said. "Yet you imply it is predictable." "Sometimes," Daniel said. "Sometimes not. But predictable or not, ignoring it rarely makes it vanish. It usually just complains loudly later." Lyrene stared at him for a long moment, then let out a soft exhalation. "You humans have a blunt honesty that is unsettling." "I prefer to think of it as refreshing," he replied. They moved along the corridor in silence for a few moments, the rotating star systems reflecting faint green glows across their faces. Lyrene considered him carefully. Humans were generally described as volatile, emotionally excessive, prone to mistakes. Yet here he was, calmly navigating alien politics and remaining remarkably grounded. There was no pretense, no careful modulation of luminous energy, no calculated deflection of attention. Just presence. "Tell me something," she said finally. "Why Earth sends diplomats like you into councils of advanced species?" "Because," Daniel said, smiling faintly, "sometimes a fresh perspective prevents everyone from agreeing on the wrong thing." She inclined her head slowly. "A dangerous perspective if misused." "I've been misused before," he said, "but I'm still standing, mostly intact." He tapped the temple implant that hummed faintly beneath his hair. "Technology helps." "Technology does not mitigate arrogance," she said. Daniel chuckled. "You'd be surprised how often it does. Well, to some extent." Lyrene's long ears shifted, flicking toward the subtle hum of energy conduits in the wall. "Your species has a peculiar way of measuring reality," she said. "You embrace contradiction." Sometimes Lyrene's long ears shifted, flicking toward the subtle hum of energy conduits in the wall. "Your species has a peculiar way of measuring reality," she said. "You embrace contradiction." "Sometimes," he admitted. "Mostly, we just survive them." She considered this, letting a small corner of her mouth curve. "Survival is not enough for us," she said. "We seek control, order, predictable outcomes." "And yet here you are," Daniel said lightly, "chatting with the one human who enjoys chaos." He grinned. "I think your definition of control might need a little adjustment." Her ears twitched involuntarily, an expression she had not intended. "Do you intend to mock me?" "Only gently," he said. "I figure if you're going to teach me about interstellar policy, I deserve a little amusement in return." "Perhaps," she said thoughtfully, "you are correct. Amusement is underrated." They walked past an observation deck, where a single planet rotated slowly beneath the clouded atmosphere, storms pulsing across its surface like fingers tracing invisible lines. Daniel leaned against the railing, staring down. "Do your people ever just pause, watch? Even when a system is unclaimed, there's a rhythm to it, a life." Lyrene's eyes narrowed slightly, catching the small humor in his tone. "We pause only when efficiency is being recalculated." "Ah," he said, "so this is what passes for recreation in interstellar bureaucracies." "Recreation is considered frivolous," she said, "though occasionally necessary to prevent revolt." Daniel laughed softly. "Good rule. On Earth we just call that vacation." Her lips quirked. "Your species is peculiar." "Thank you. I think that's a compliment." They stopped before a large, three-dimensional map of the Heliox system projected in midair. The planets orbiting slowly, faint rings, spinning around one of the gas giants. Lyrene gestured toward the central world. "We assume they are insignificant," she said, "but insignificance is a dangerous assumption." Insignificance, Daniel said slowly, is mostly a perspective problem, especially if someone thinks it is safe to ignore you. That rarely works out. Her ears twitched forward, not entirely in irritation this time. You humans possess an odd wisdom, she said. It is unsettling. I'll take unsettling as a compliment, he said. Also, I'm not sure if my wisdom is odd or just sporadically functional. She allowed a brief laugh. Sporadic functionality is more reliable than the consensus in the chamber. Daniel raised an eyebrow. You really didn't like the chamber, did you? I despise it, she admitted, letting her voice drop to a conspiratorial whisper. I am tolerated at best, mostly ignored. Which is why you spoke to me. He asked. Yes, she said simply, because you listened. He scratched his head in a self-conscious manner. I figured someone had to, otherwise I might have missed all the fun. Lyrene considered this carefully. You do not fully understand our language, she said. You do not fully grasp our culture, yet you listened. And you didn't crush me, he said. That also helps. Her lips curved, almost imperceptibly. I have a standard for amusement, she said. Crushing humans falls below it. He laughed out loud this time, a full, rolling sound. Glad to hear it. I would hate to be below standard. A small beat of silence fell between them as they watched the Heliox system continue its stately rotations. For the first time in many cycles, Lyrene did not feel isolated. The oppressive hum of consensus, the precise, polished dismissals, even the cold calculation of efficiency, none of it seemed as suffocating as it had before. You have survived worse, she said, her voice low, thoughtful. I suppose it is because humans are resilient. And occasionally reckless, he said. It balances things out. Her long ears angled forward, curious. Recklessness sometimes produces unexpected insights, she murmured. I had forgotten this. Consider me a reminder, Daniel said lightly. Also, I make terrible coffee, so I guess I'm full of surprises. She allowed herself a genuine smile, small but warm. Very well, I shall tolerate you for now. Excellent. That's more than most aliens in the chamber get, he said. The corridor widened, and the distant hum of machinery softened as they approached a wider observation deck overlooking the planet below. Storms pulsed faintly, electrical arcs flickering through thick clouds. Lyrene's hand hovered briefly over the railing, the vibration of energy resonating against her fingertips. You truly are unlike any human I have encountered, she said softly. And I think that's fair, Daniel replied. I try my best. I also have the advantage of being a little stubborn. Her ears twitched, the only acknowledgement of amusement she allowed herself. Stubbornness can be effective, she said. At least more so than silence. Then consider me the champion of stubbornness, he said, with a faint bow of the head. She regarded him for a moment, red hair catching the soft green light of the corridor. Perhaps, she said, we shall see what this alliance of the ignored and the stubborn can achieve. He smiled, tilting his head toward the planet. I have a feeling the universe is about to become very interesting. Her long ears flicked forward, attentive and curious. Interesting? Yes, that is a start. The council chamber was quiet now, though not empty. Lyrene stood near the center, her red hair catching the subtle bioluminescence of the crystalline walls. Around her, the Averial delegates lingered, some still floating slightly above the floor on personal levitation fields, others leaning casually against panels or hovering projection arrays. They were watching, though not with the disinterest or disdain she had become accustomed to over so many cycles. The quiet was curious, almost reverent, not because of her stature, not because of her bloodline, but because she had improbably changed the shape of the conversation itself. Daniel stood beside her, suit wrinkled in a way no one would have dared wear before the chamber, eyes scanning the floating maps of the Heliox system. His presence had become familiar, almost grounding, in the swirling pattern of alien judgment and expectation. He had no council rank, no formal authority, yet somehow he was integral to this moment, an outside variable that had become a pivot point in a system that prided itself on predictability. Lyrene took a measured breath. We begin, she said softly. The words were simple, but in them rested the weight of cycles of dismissal, of ignored calculations, of invisible protests folded into every decision she had ever attempted to make. The delegates shifted, some reluctantly tuning their attention back to the central hub, others because of curiosity. Because she had never approached them like this before, and the human at her side made the gesture almost acceptable. "We have observed the Heliox system," she began, her long ears twitching subtly, conveying emphasis that mere words could not fully carry. "We have noted 3 planets. Each exhibits emergent civilizations, each offers resources for our collective prosperity, yet none requires immediate domination. Cooperation, calculated, monitored, cautious, offers greater stability than assimilation or conquest." She let the words hang, and for the first time, silence was not an act of dismissal. It was attention. One of the elder delegates, voice low and resonant, finally broke it. "And you trust this human's counsel in your assessment?" Lyrene's ears flicked forward, acknowledging the challenge without defensiveness. "I do not trust blindly. I do not defer to ignorance. I trust his willingness to consider evidence and to endure scrutiny without fear or pretense. His perspective, Earth's perspective, provides a variable that our calculations alone have neglected." Daniel shifted slightly. "I'm honored," he said quietly, "though I assure you I mostly make mistakes." Lyrene allowed herself a faint smile, almost imperceptible. Humor was no longer a secret language between them, it was a bridge. "Your errors," she said, "are more transparent than our hidden biases. That alone is valuable." The elder's harmonic hum vibrated through the chamber. "And the other delegates, those of us who have maintained tradition for cycles." She glanced at them in turn, noting the faint flickers of doubt, the subtle recalibration of posture, the ears twitching, small signs of engagement rather than dismissal. "Tradition is not obsolete," she said. "But isolation is a form of stagnation. Our species has thrived on adaptation. We have survived cycles of collapse, civil unrest, and interstellar expansion only because we observed, calculated, and when necessary, acted contrary to consensus. Isolation is safe only until the universe reminds you it does not care for your comfort." Daniel, watching quietly, tilted his head. "And now the universe is reminding them." She allowed herself a quiet chuckle. "Perhaps." The projection rings above rotated to display the Heliox system in high resolution. Streams of data overlaying planetary surfaces, energy grids, and orbital patterns. Lyrene stepped closer, gesturing at a smaller, emerald-tinged planet. "Planet 2 shows emerging technological capability. We can offer knowledge exchange, agricultural support, and resource management programs. The probability of resistance decreases if engagement is voluntary and mutually beneficial." A younger delegate, not yet hardened by cycles of protocol, spoke softly. "You are proposing diplomacy without threat." Lyrene's lips curved lightly. "Correct, without overt coercion, without immediate dominance. Negotiated exchange, monitored with transparency. It will be challenging." She let the word float, knowing every listener understood it implicitly. Challenging was their term for risk, discomfort, deviation from ritual. "And you," the elder said, voice echoing softly, "are willing to risk your standing to implement this." Lyrene straightened, long ears angled forward, eyes reflecting the faint green glow of the projection. "I am willing to risk stagnation," she said. "I have endured silence and dismissal. I will not endure repetition of failure when an alternative exists." The chamber hummed again, lighter this time, the vibrations not of dissent but of consideration. Delegates glanced at one another, whispers of subharmonics rippling through the data field. Some adjusted the orientation of their personal displays, recalibrating algorithms, debating silently whether the logic presented could be ignored. It could not. Daniel's hand hovered near the floating interface, ready to point out variables or probabilities, though he wisely remained silent, aware that too much interference would feel condescending. Instead, he offered small affirmations, a nod here, a subtle adjustment there, each gesture reinforcing Lyrene's words without overshadowing them. He had become a silent partner, an unseen current lending strength. Hours passed in the chamber, though measured by human time it was mere minutes. And then, As the projections stabilized and the delegates' calculations slowly converged on the proposed cooperation model, a subtle shift occurred. A vote, not unanimous but sufficient, flickered across the network. Preliminary approval for joint observation missions, monitored trade, and knowledge exchange. Lyrene exhaled softly. The weight of cycles of isolation lifted fractionally. She glanced at Daniel, whose expression was quiet triumph tempered with disbelief. "We actually did it," she murmured. "Did we?" he asked. "Or did they just stop pretending to ignore you?" "Perhaps both," she said, amusement threading her voice. "Both is more likely." The chamber's energy dimmed to a resting glow, and delegates began to drift toward exits, leaving Lyrene and Daniel near the observation platform. The Heliox system rotated below them, clouds churning in mesmerizing patterns, planetary lights reflecting like slow-burning embers. "I must admit," Daniel said, leaning against the railing, "I wasn't sure anyone would actually listen. Least of all, anyone with your perspective." Lyrene tilted her head, long ears catching the faint vibrations of the storm below. "I have often spoken alone," she said. "Today, for the first time in many cycles, I was heard. And perhaps, just perhaps, I was considered." Daniel grinned. "Consideration is underrated. Also, I think your species underestimates the human capacity for stubborn optimism." She allowed herself a genuine smile, broader now, warmed by relief and amusement. "Stubborn optimism, yes, that might be valuable. Perhaps we will survive cycles yet." A small laugh escaped him. "I like the sound of that. And I must say, the chamber is more interesting when someone refuses to be ignored." Lyrene's gaze returned to the planets below, to the swirling clouds of Heliox, to the potential futures unfolding in quiet rotations. She had faced isolation, dismissal, subtle hostility, and the weight of expectation. She had spoken, not just for herself, but for the unseen voices of reason and observation that had long been silenced by protocol. And she had learned that even in a universe ruled by precision, metrics, and hierarchy, a single voice, persistent, courageous, unflinching, could shift the flow of entire systems. Daniel tilted his head toward her. "So, what's next?" Lyrene considered this. She had no desire to rush into another chamber of protocol, no need to immediately capitalize on the fragile momentum. She had done what she had set out to do. Assert herself, build understanding, and, against expectation, create trust. Now she allowed herself a moment to simply exist outside the crushing weight of dismissal. "We observe," she said slowly, deliberately. "We continue. We measure, we learn, and we engage, carefully, thoughtfully, without fear of being ignored again." Daniel smiled, dark eyes reflecting the planet's glow. "I like that plan, and I'm sticking around for the learning part.